is Irene Schwan, and I'm 103 years old. Will be 104 in January. And I grew up here in Biloxi. I love Biloxi. And I've got a few things to say about Biloxi and the people of Biloxi. I think things are going to shapen up very nicely in the future. The future looks brighter, and I think everything that's being done right now will come out on top again, once again on Howard Avenue. Well, I was on Howard Avenue, East Howard Avenue, and so like I say, I had a bird's eye view of everything that happened because everything happened on Howard Avenue. All the stores were there. Whatever you wanted, you had to go to Howard Avenue to buy it. So it was, I mean, I took it for granted while I was there. But looking back, I realized, and I was around adults all the time, so I listened to all their conversations and knew what was going on. All the parades were there. And of course, old Skeet Hunt and his wife were my godparents. And so that got us involved in the carnival too, you know. So it was a wonderful time. And so when I saw Howard Avenue fading away, it was really a sad time. So I was glad to see Fofo rebuilding and trying to bring some of it back. Of course, the streetcars would run down, you know, the street right in front of the store. And just everything was just so, you know, everything was just so nice back in those days. You know, the air was pure. The food was pure, no hormones in the food and all those chemicals in the food. And like you say, we didn't have air conditioning, didn't have TVs, and so we played outside. Everything was, and I think that's just a healthy way of growing up. We would just run down to the beach by ourselves. No one, you know, everybody knew everybody. And I'd leave the store, I swam all summer long. All summer. I'd run down to the beach and go in swimming at the community pier. Of course, there was a lifeguard there, Mr. Hussolini. I'll never forget that man, because he used to make me swim for the tourists. And he'd say, okay, I want you to swim for these people. Well, I was just a little thing. But I guess I was like a little fish in the water, because he always wanted me to swim for the tourists. You know, Biloxi was small, like I told you. 18,000 population, I think, around when I was little. So there wasn't that much traffic. But there were cars they used to park when we moved from, I've got a picture there that lady played, of the old City Hall. You know, that's where I played, on the steps of the old City Hall. And that street that goes down there, it goes straight down to the beach. But no, there wasn't that much, the traffic wasn't a problem back then. Things were changing, but it wasn't a big change until I think the casinos came in. The winters were colder, because I played golf, and that's what I know, because we always check the weather. And I played golf, it was 42 degrees. I played with Irene Schwan, who was a champion of Mississippi for 2 years. It was Ladies' Day, on a Wednesday, and she was the only one out there, and the pro, Frank Steedle. I said, Frank, anybody out there? He says, yeah, Irene Flavian. And Irene Flavian happened to be on the phone. She says, come on out and we'll go play. The two of us played. But you see, it was 42 degrees, but the wind wasn't blowing, which makes a big difference, and the sun was out. And we walked the course then. And a course, you know, is about, 4 miles. And you pull in your cart. So she passed away, but I used to tell her, remember that day we played? And everybody walked the course back then. You didn't ride in a cart back then. We had a large crowd that played on Ladies' Day from Gulfport and Biloxi back in those days. They'll never have another crowd like we had. We had a big crowd of women that played on Ladies' Day out at Sunkist. Of course, my mother and father were, that's why they worked so hard, was to send their children to be educated. That was the main thing, get your education. And my sister graduated from Southern, she was a teacher. And Vincent went to LSU, my brother went to LSU. So those people, that was the main thing, was to educate their children. When I taught school, there was, like one little boy would start in the 4th grade. He was a husky young man, but he would only go just so many months, and then when I guess it was shrimp season would come, I wouldn't see him anymore. So I asked Miss Holloway what happened to him. I said, because he's a pretty smart young man. And she said that he had to go on the boat. His daddy makes him work on the boat at that time of the year. So for 2 years straight, he would come to my class. And he'd stay there a certain length of time, then he'd disappear. And I often wondered what happened to him, because he was smart, he should have been educated. But that's the way it was back then. My principal was A.J. Holloway's aunt. That was Delphine Holloway. And she had been there, I think, for 20, 25 years and I was a young person then. And she told me, because, see, I had my class, I had a 4th grade class, and I always had not less than 42 students. There were 2 4th grade classes. The other 4th grade teacher was an elderly. To me, she was elderly, but I was so young, she probably wasn't as old as I thought. But always had at least 42. And she said, now, Irene, if any of them misbehaves, you got to spank them. She had a little paddle. I don't think she hurt them, but she would. She'd spank them. And I told her, I said, Miss Holloway, I guess I can't spank those children. And she said, well, you send them to me and I'll spank them. So I never had to send any of them to her. Oh, there's so many choices they have to make. I feel sorry for them. You got to keep your eye on you got to be careful what you do, what you say, how you behave, everything. You have to be so careful today. It's hard to be young today. My mother took care of the grocery store. And my daddy had a horse and wagon. And the Birds family from across the bay. There weren't many people. We called that out in the country, and they would call in, tell my mother what they needed. Well, nothing was packaged then. You know, it came in sacks. Sacks of rice and sacks of everything. And they would call in what they wanted, and my daddy would pack everything up on his wagon, and he would go out to, it's a little town over there, one of those right across the bay, and he would deliver that with this horse and this wagon, but that was going out in the country. And my brother went with him one time. He was a little boy. And my brother told me later on in his older age, he says, you know, he says, I remember one time I went out there with Papa. We call him Papa. And he said a call was coming. And he said the old horse, I was worried about the car coming because it was like a path. And my daddy told me, he says, don't worry. He says, he knows what to do. And sure enough, the horse pulled off on the side and let the car go by, or the truck go by. And so that old horse was used to that, used to traveling that road to Wool Market. Wool Market was going out in the country, because that was out in the country. And look at Wool Market today. You would have, like when my mother's grocery store was on the corner, and then you'd have a fruit stand. That was there in Gladys. And then you would have another store, which was the meat market. That was the Jelusage in that family. And then farther up, you had the furniture stores. That was Coquettes and Clowers. And of course, Quinn's drugstore was on that corner where they built the bank. And back of the bank was the bakery, Klein's Bakery. And that's where I lived, on that block, really. My mother had a slot machine in the grocery store. And all at once, what happened, I don't know, because I was young then, but it disappeared. They got rid of it. But all the stores had slot machines. They were all over the place. Well, you know, you don't have the energy to do too much, so whatever you do takes a lot of time. But just the little things that, since I still drive, you know, I can go to the store, I go to the bank, I go to the post office, because all my friends are gone. Hazel Jones was about the last one, and she passed away about a year ago, less than a year ago. But they are all my friends are all gone. See, I worked in my yard a lot. When, you know, things were not, there was no, and I was always doing something physical, and of course back then we were going to church, and after church there was a bunch of us that would go to McElroy's and have breakfast there. That's when McElroy's had that big crowd of breakfast. Oh my gosh, we had more fun there. And our bunch was, there was a bunch of us, but there were 5 or 6 of us that were always together. But see, everybody was like family back then. It didn't care where you came from. Biloxi was a melting pot of so many, and everybody, you know, was for one another. It didn't matter where you came from. They all wanted everybody to do well and to be happy, you know. That's about it, and I've enjoyed visiting with you.